Talking politics, cats and dogs. Talking politics, cats and dogs. Talking politics, cats and dogs.
So one thing most Americans agree on is that the news is very biased, and most Americans aren't good at sussing out bias. But there's an exercise that we can do that can help with this. We can look at a historical document. In this case, we're going to look at Francis Drake's 1884 Writing Tea Leaves, which is about the Boston Tea Party, and we're going to ask the critical question. And that can help give us a lens of objectivity because we have no stake in whether or not tea leaves is accurate. And we can take that skill and apply it to the modern news. Now, Francis Drake was an American historian. He was writing in the post-Civil War. His more well-known work was Dictionary of American Biographies, written in 1872, which had 10,000 historical sketches of various figures in it. He was living during a very tumultuous time. He could have been wanting to look back at a time when America had also been tumultuous and reassuring people by showing them how we got through it. The other alternative is he could have been very autistic, and that was just the thing he's into. The only way we can really make an educated guess, since he didn't tell us his intention, is we can look at the body of his work, we can look at the tone of his work, and then we can look at the historical context of it. Now, you can tell me if you think I'm off base with this, but I think the way that Drake portrays the people involved in this conflict is very inaccurate. He portrays them all as civilized people resolving an argument. Now, one of the things we should know is that there is an incredible amount of bureaucracy here. The rock that is being talked about is Francis Rock, and he's about 23. And his father, Joseph, is a Quaker who owns a shipping business. Now, at this point, they're transporting tea, and it's the first shipment from the East India Company after the Tea Act is passed. But one of the things that he fails to mention is that this Quaker business owner has a very poor reputation, and he's been accused of smuggling, which frankly everybody was accused of smuggling at this point. He's been accused of trying to build a monopoly, and he's just been accused of raising the price of whale oil just arbitrarily. So people don't like him. He's gone to trial one time for these things, but he's gotten let off. I don't know if the dad had a very good reputation. Now, at the time that Francis was about 4, John Hancock had inherited a shipping business and tried to be his Joseph Rock's main rival, but he just wasn't successful, and he ended up going back to importing alcohol. He got in trouble for smuggling too. Now, John Hancock and Governor Hutchinson seemed to be on pretty good terms. John Hancock had negotiated with Governor Hutchinson to remove British troops after the Boston Massacre. And John Hancock was present on the night of the Boston Tea Party. He didn't participate. He did approve. He said he approved of the action, but he didn't approve of the destruction of property. Drake makes it sound like there wasn't destruction of property. He also said, "Let every man do what is right in his own eyes." Now, John Hancock probably knew the Bible pretty well. And in Judges 21:25, there is also a verse, "In those days there was no king in Israel, and every man did which was right in his own eyes." The issue with that is in Judges, it's not a good thing that every man did what is right in his own eyes. It's kind of describing that Israel was a chaotic, lawless place. Most historians see that quote as John Hancock approving these actions. When you put it in biblical context, I'm not sure that's true. Now, Samuel Adams doesn't like Governor Hutchinson at all. He says that guy's a traitor because of all the times he's worked with the British. The questions I would ask of you as you listen to this passage is, first of all, do you think this is an accurate account? Does it seem to match the people's personalities? Or is it telling a different story of what the author wants to tell a story about? And my second question would be, are we telling the same story about America that this story is telling? Or is our definition of what America is totally different in our media right now? The eventful Thursday, December 16th, 1773, a day ever memorable in the annals of the town, witnessed the largest gathering yet seen at Old South Meeting House. Nearly 7,000 persons constituted the assembly. Business was laid aside, and notwithstanding the rain, at least 2,000 people flocked in from the country for 20 miles around. This time there was no need of handbills, there were none. No effort was required to bring together the multitude that quietly but anxiously awaited the outcome of the meeting. The gravity of the situation was universally felt. Immediate action was necessary, as the 20 days allowed for clearance terminated that night. Then the revenue officials could take possession, and under the cover of the naval force, land the tea, and the opposition to this would have caused bloody work. The patriots would have gladly avoided the issue, but it was forced upon them, and they could not recede with honor. The committee having reported the failure of its application for a clearance, Roch was directed to enter a protest at the custom house as to apply to the governor for a pass to proceed on this day with his vessel on his voyage for London. He replied that it was impracticable to comply with this requirement. He was then reminded of his promise, and on being asked if he would direct the Dartmouth to sail, replied that he would not. The meeting, after directing him to use all possible dispatch in making his protest and procuring his pass, adjourned until 3 o'clock. At the afternoon meeting, information was given that several towns had agreed not to use tea. A vote was taken to the effect that its use was improper and pernicious, and it would be well for all the towns to appoint committees of inspection to prevent this accursed tea from coming among them. Shall we abide by a formal resolution with respect to the not suffering the tea to be landed was now the question. Samuel Adams, Dr. Thomas Young, and Josiah Quincy Jr., an ardent young patriot devotedly attached to the liberties of his country, were the principal speakers. Only a fragment of the speech of Quincy remains. Counseling moderation, in the spirit of prophecy, he said, "It is not, Mr. Moderator, the spirit of vapors within these walls that must stand us instead. The exertions of this day will call forth the events which will make a very difficult spirit necessary for our salvation. Whoever supposes that shouts and hosannas will terminate the trials of the day, entertains a childish fancy. We must be grossly ignorant of the importance and the value of the prize for which we contend. We must be equally ignorant of the power of those who have combined against us. We must be blind to that malice, inveteracy, and insatiable revenge which actuates our enemies, public and private, abroad and in our bosom, to hope that we shall end this controversy without the sharpest conflicts, to flatter ourselves that popular resolves, popular hurrahs, popular acclamations, and popular vapor will vanquish our foes. Let us consider the issue. Let us look to the end. Let us weigh and consider before we advance to those measures which must bring on the most trying and terrific struggle this country ever saw." But the time for weighing and considering the business at hand had passed. Time pressed, and decisive action alone remained. Now that the hand is at the plow, it was said, there must be no looking back. At 4:30, it was unanimously voted that the tea should not be landed. An effort was now made to dissolve the meeting, but it was continued at the request of some of those present from the country, who wished to hear the result of Roch's application to the governor. It was an unusual time of the year to be at a country seat, but Governor Hutchinson was found at his Milton residence by Roch, who renewed his request for a pass. Questioned by the governor as to the intentions of the people, Roch replied that they only intended to force the tea back to England, but there might be some who desired that the vessel might go down the harbor and be brought out by a shot from the castle, that it might be said that the people had done everything in their power to send the tea back. Catching this straw, with the instinct of a drowning man, Hutchinson offered Roch a letter to Admiral Montagu, commending ship and goods to his protection, if Roch would agree to have his ship haul out into the stream, but he replied that there were none willing to assist him in doing this, and the attempt would subject him to the ill will of the people. Hutchinson then sternly repeated his refusal of a pass, as it would have been a direct countenancing and encouraging the violation of the acts of trade, thus closed the last opportunity for concession. It is only fair to say that the performance of what he honestly believed to be his duty was as vital a consideration with Thomas Hutchinson, the royal governor, as the opposition to the measures which he believed to be hostile to the liberties of his country was to Samuel Adams, the popular leader. We can at this day well afford to mete out this tardy justice to a man whose motives and conduct have been so bitterly and as scrupulously vilified and maligned as have been those of Thomas Hutchinson. When Roch returned and told the result of his application, it was nearly 6 o'clock. Darkness had set in, and the Old South, dimly lighted with candles, was still filled with anxious and impatient multitude. "Who knows," said John Rowe, "how tea will mingle with salt water?" The people hurrahed vehemently, and the cry rose, "A mob! A mob!" A call to order restored quiet. Dr. Young then addressed the meeting, saying that Roch was a good man, who had done all in his power to gratify the people, and charged them to do no harm to his person or property. To the final question put to him, whether he would send his vessel back to sea with tea in her, under the present circumstances, he replied that he could not, as he apprehended that a compliance would prove his ruin. He also admitted that if called upon by the proper persons, he should attempt to land the tea for his own security. Adams then arose and uttered the fateful words, "This meeting can do nothing more to save the country." This was doubtless the preconcerted signal for action, and was answered by the men who sounded a war whoop at the church door. The cry re-echoed from the gallery, where a voice cried out, "Boston Harbor a teapot tonight! Hurrah for Gifford's Wharf!" And the Mohawks passed on to cut the Gordian knot with their hatchets. Silence was again commanded when the people, after manifesting a most exemplary patience and caution in the methods they had pursued to preserve the property of the East India Company and return it safe and untouched to its owners, perceiving that every step they had been thwarted by the co-signees and their co-adjudicators, then dissolved the meeting, giving 3 cheers as they dispersed. Meanwhile, a number of persons, variously estimated from 20 to 80, their number increasing as they advanced, some of them disguised as Indian and armed with hatchets or axes, hurried to Griffin's, now Liverpool, wharf, boarded the ships, and, warning their crews and the customs officers to keep out of the way, in less than 3 hours' time had broken and emptied the dock 342 chests of tea, value at 18,000 pounds. The deed was not that of a lawless mob, but of the deliberate and well-considered act of intelligent as well as determined men. So careful were they not to destroy or injure private property that they even replaced a padlock they had broken. There was no noise nor confusion. They worked so quietly and systematically that those on shore could distinctly hear the strokes of the hatchet. As soon as people learned what was going forward, they made their way to the scene of operations, covering the wharfs in the vicinity, whence they looked on silently during the performance. The night was clear, the moon shone brilliantly, no one was harmed, and the town never more quiet. Next day, the Dorchester shore was lined with tea, carried thither by the wind and tide. The serious spirit in which this deed was regarded by the leaders is illustrated by the act of one who, after assisting his apprentice to disguise himself, dropped upon his knees and prayed fervently for his safety and the success of the enterprise. Among the speculators of the scene were Dr. John Price of Salem, John Andrews, and Dr. Hugh Williamson, who afterwards went an examination respecting the affair before the British House of Commons. Where is now the wide Atlantic Avenue, the old footpath under Fort Hill, known as Flounder Lane, and afterwards as Broad Street, wound around the margin of the water. C Street was with its continuation to Wheeler's Point, the foot of Summer Street. Opposite where Hutchinson, now Pearl Street, entered Flounder Lane, was Griffin's Wharf. The laying out of Broad Street and Atlantic Avenue, and the consequent widening and filling in, have resulted in obliterating Griffin's Wharf, although in Liverpool Wharf it has a legitimate successor. The old dock logs were found near the center of the avenue. The coal office of the Messrs. Chapin now occupies the site rendered memorable by the exploit of the Boston Tea Party.